Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Abiola. In today's tutorial, I'll be showing you how to make an elastic waisted shirt with a drawstring and eyelet detail. This tutorial is very beginner friendly as I'll be showing you all the important details you need to make this shirt. Now, the tutorial for the shirt I paired with this shirt is already up on the channel, and that one is also beginner friendly. I'll leave the link in the description box and in the comments, so do check it out. The materials required includes 1 yard of any fabric of choice. You would also need a matching thread. You would need a drawstring, but this is not important. You can as well just cut out the same fabric and make a strap out of it, okay? You would need eyelets. That is if you want this eyelet detail on your shorts. It is not a must, okay? You would also need elastic. An elastic comes in different widths, okay? We have the 1.5 inch elastic, the 2 inches, the 1 inch, and the 2.5 inch elastic. And the one you would use depends on how wide you want your waistband to be. I will be using the 1.5 inch elastic because that is how wide I want my waistband to be. The first step is to fold a small piece of fabric into two, and you may be wondering, how do I know the exact width and the length of fabric to fold? Well, I'm going to teach you how to do that. You would have to calculate, okay? What I have is 16 inches on fold, and here is how I arrived at that 16 inches. The first step is to write out your hip circumference measurement. And here is how to take that measurement. Just place your tape rule around the widest part of your hip, and do not forget to place in a finger and move the tape around so your measurement isn't too tight. Mine is 42 inches. Remember, we're making a free elastic short, okay? That means we're going to add ease. The ease I decided to add is 4 inches. The ease that you add depends on how free, how wide, or how baggy you want your shorts to be. So now, my new hip circumference is going to be 42 plus 4, which gives 46 inches. My new hip circumference measurement is 46 inches. Remember, we have 4 parts of a trouser, 2 front and 2 back. So to get the required fabric, we'll have to divide our new hip circumference, which is 46 inches, by 4. 46 divided by 4 is 11.5 inches. To that 11.5 inches, I am going to add 1 inch seam allowance, okay? The reason I'm using 1 inch seam allowance is because I'm going to use ½ inch to stitch the side seam and ½ inch to stitch the crotch area, okay? So that's why I added 1 inch. So 11.5 inches plus 1 inch seam allowance gives 12.5 inches. Because we're making a short, we also need to calculate our crotch extension, which is gotten by dividing your original hip circumference by 16. I know I might get questions like this. It is a standard and it works for everyone, okay? Since that part of the paper is filled up, I am going to rewrite that formula here. Crotch extension equals original hip circumference divided by 16. My original hip circumference is 42. 42 divided by 16 equals 2.625. So the total width of fabric required is going to be calculated by adding this 12.5 we got behind plus the crotch extension, which is 2.625. So when you add both of them together, you will get 15.125. So I just like to approximate that to 16 inches to be on the safe side. So basically, the quantity of fabric needed for the front is 16 inches on fold, or 16 plus 16, which gives 32 for the 2 front, okay? So that's it, guys. Now let's move over to the length, okay? In order to determine the length of fabric required for the front, the first thing you need to determine is how long you want your shorts to be. For me, I want mine to be 16 inches long. Next, you will need to add your ½ inch waistband joining allowance. That is the allowance you would use to join your shorts to the waistband, okay? And finally, you need to add your 1 inch hemming allowance. It could be more than 1 inch, it depends on what you want. So now we're going to add that 16 to the 0.5 inches to the 1 inch hemming allowance, and that is going to give 17.5 inches. The total length of the shorts I'm working with is 17.5 inches, but that's not the length we are going to cut out because we first need to remove the waistband measurement from it. Like I mentioned earlier, the width of your elastic will determine how wide your waistband will be. For me, I'm using a 1.5-inch elastic, so my waistband will also be 1.5 inches wide. Now let's do the math. 17.5 minus 1.5 inches gives us 16 inches. That 16 inches is the length of the short we are cutting without the waistband. We'll cut the waistband separately and attach later. I hope I made so much sense with my explanation. So we are going to cut out a length of 16 inches and a width of 16 inches on fold. So just to confirm, I have my fabric folded and it is 16 inches on fold. That's exactly what I need, okay? Now over to the length. The length I actually need is also 16 inches. But if you look closely, you'll see I have 18 inches here. That's fine. I like to have a little extra to work with. I'll just trim off the extra later. Two things to note. Remember to place your fabric on fold, right sides facing each other. Also remember to use your chalk to note the wrong side of your fabric, especially if both the wrong and the right sides are very identical. Okay, just to avoid confusion.
So guys, the first thing I like to do is to draw out a straight line at the top of the fabric to ensure the top is very straight. Once I draw out that straight line, I'll just go in with my scissors to trim it out.
Next, I'll go ahead to mark out half-inch allowance for joining the short to the waistband. I'll just mark that half inch at several points, then go in with my ruler to connect all the points to form a straight line. Next, you need to decide how wide you want your waistband to be. I want my waistband to be 1.5 inches wide because I'll be using a 1.5-inch elastic. So I am going to place that 1.5 inch exactly on the allowance line, and that is where I'll start taking all my vertical measurements. Just like I had mentioned earlier, the width of your waistband can be 1 to 2.5 inches. It all depends on you and the width of the elastic you are working with. The next step is to mark out your hip point and your crotch depth. And here is how to take both measurements. First, locate your natural waistline by tilting to the side. Proceed to tie a rope on your natural waistline where you have the fold whilst tilting to the side. Then proceed to take your hip point measurement from your natural waistline to the widest part of your hips. Mine is 10 inches. After that, proceed to take your crotch depth measurement by getting a stool, preferably a wooden stool without foam. So sit on the stool, then proceed to take your measurement from your natural waistline to where the stool starts and where your bum bum stops, okay? Get someone to take that measurement for you because most times it might be inaccurate if you take it by yourself. One important thing to note is to sit upright when taking your crotch depth measurement. My crotch depth measurement is 10.5 inches, okay? So I'll proceed now to mark out my hip point, which is 10 inches. So I'm going to mark it at several points, then go in with my ruler to connect the point into a straight line. The next step is to mark out our crotch depth measurement. Do not forget to maintain your 1.5 inch on the half inch allowance, okay? Ensure to take all your measurements, maintaining it this way, okay? So now we will not be using our crotch depth measurements like that. We want our shorts free and comfy. So we're going to add ease, okay? So I'm going to write out my crotch depth measurement, which is 10.5. Then I went ahead to add ease to it. I decided to use an ease of 1.5 inches, okay? So 10.5 plus 1.5 gives me 12 inches. All right, note that you can add more than 1.5 inch ease. Okay, for the black one that you see on the screen, I used an ease of 2 inches instead. So it totally depends on you and how free you want your crotch to be. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead to mark 12 inches as my crotch depth measurement. So I'll mark that 12 inches at several points, go in with my ruler to connect the point into a straight line. Next, I'll go ahead to mark the length of my shirt, which is 16 inches. I would also proceed to mark my 1 inch hemming allowance, which is 17. So I'll mark both points, 16 and 17, at several points, then go in with my ruler to connect all the points together. Remember, the length I told you we needed without the waistband is 16 inches. So now let's measure from the top. We used exactly 16 inches. So I'll go in with my scissors and trim off the excess that we do not need, okay? Remember, our new hip circumference is 46 inches and we have 4 parts of a trouser. 46 divided by 4 gives us 11.5. So 11.5 plus our 1 inch seam allowance is 12.5 inches. So that 12.5 inches is what we are going to mark on the hip line. After marking it on the hip line, we'll also mark it on the crotch line. Then finally, we're going to mark it on the waistline. And then we're going to go ahead to connect all 3 points into a straight line.
The next step is to mark out our crotch extension, and if you remember how we calculated that, that is original hip circumference divided by 16. My original hip is 42. 42 divided by 16 is 2.625, okay? But most times, I just prefer to use 2.5 inches instead. 2.625, 2.5 inch, both of them would work, okay? The next step is to go on the crotch line and mark the 2.5 inches crotch extension. We are marking the crotch extension after the straight line we marked earlier, okay? The next step is to form our crotch curve. In order to do that, you would have to go up from the crotch by 2 inches and mark. Then come out from the angle 90 area by 1 inch and mark. After doing that, you're going to connect these 3 points together just as shown. You could use your free hand or your curve. Anyone you decide to use is fine, okay? The next step is to shape the waist. I'm going to go in on the waistline by half of an inch and I would mark, okay? And I will use my curve to connect from the waistline to the hip line just as shown. After doing that, I will go to my crotch line and take the measurement that I have from here to here. After measuring what I have there, I got 15 inches. So I'm going to take that 15 inches and mark on the short length line. Then I would go in with my ruler to connect both points together into a straight line. I would also ensure to extend the line towards the allowance line as well. After doing all of that, the next step is to cut out the front part of our short just as shown. After cutting out the front part of the shorts, the next step is to cut out the back of the short. On the table, I have a small piece of fabric that is placed on fold. What I have there is 20 inches placed on fold, and let me show you how I got that measurement, okay? That calculation we did before where we got 16 inches on fold for the front width. To get the back width, to that 16 inches, just add 4 inches and you would have 20 inches width. That's just it. Just add 4 inches to whatever you got before, okay? The next step is to also calculate the back length, and the back length is usually longer than the front length because of the bum bum, okay? So to calculate the back length, we are going to write out the initial 16 inches we used, okay, plus extra. And the extra inches you need to add is usually between 1 to 3 inches depending on how big your bum bum is. I just use one and one works perfectly for me. 1.5 will still do, okay? So depending on how big your bum bum is, that's the amount you're going to add, okay? So I'm going to add 1 inches bum allowance for myself because that works for me perfectly. So 16 plus 1 is 17 inches length for my back, okay? For the back part of my trouser. If you look closely, what I have here is 18 inches, which is more than the 17 I need, but that is not a problem as I will trim off any excess just like I did for the front. I also have 20 inches on fold if you look closely, okay? Just like we did for the front, do not forget to use your chalk to indicate the wrong part of your fabric, especially if it is very difficult to tell the difference, okay? Now, from the two front patterns, pick out the one with the markings. We're going to use this one to cut out the back. Just place it on the back pattern just as shown, whilst ensuring that you have 2 inches at the center front area and 2 inches at the side front area. The next step is to go ahead to extend all the lines. I would extend the crotch depth line, the short length line, the hip line, the waist line, and the allowance line. After extending all the lines, the next step is to lift the front pattern and connect the hip line properly. The hip line especially, okay, because we need it. Remember, our back is not straight, and in order to account for that, I am going to go in at the center front on the waistline by 2 inches and I would mark. Then I'll replace that 2 inches back to the waistline on the side and I would mark it as well. I'll mark that same 2 inches on the hip line, on the crotch line, on the short length line, and finally on the allowance line. Next, I'll connect from the waistline to the hip line using a slight curve, and finally connect from the hip line to the allowance line using a ruler, just as shown. In order to make space for the bum bum, I am going to go up from that 2-inch point by 1 inch and I would mark. And like I said, it depends on how big your bum bum is, okay? 1 inch works very well for me. If your bum is bigger than mine, you can use 1.5, you can use 2, you can even use 2.5, depending on your size. Then I'll go ahead to connect from that 1-inch point to the side, just as shown. The next step is to use your chalk to note your front hip line, just as shown. Then lift up the front pattern and go in by 1 inch from that point and mark. After that, go ahead to lay the front pattern properly on the back pattern just like you did before. From the front crotch line, go out by 2 inches and mark. This will also help us make space for the bum bum, okay? One more thing we need to do to make space for the bum bum is to go down by half an inch from the 2-inch point just as shown. Now, go ahead to lift up your front pattern. Let's connect all 3 points together. You can use your free hand or curve. I'll connect from the crotch to the hip, just as shown. Then I'll use my ruler to connect from the hip to the waistline. And that is the back crotch curve. The next step is to align your front pattern properly. Then go in with your ruler to connect from your crotch line to the short length line, just as shown. After doing all of this, the next step is to cut out our short pattern, the back pattern, okay? So I'll go in with my scissors to cut out the back pattern. You can also take out your front pattern so that you can cut out properly, okay? So here is our back pattern and here is our front pattern. The next step is to bring in our back pattern and place them right sides facing each other so that we can stitch on the wrong side, okay? So I'll just mark out the half-inch allowance I added from beginning to the end. If you can eyeball half-inch while sewing, you don't need to mark this. After marking that half-inch allowance, I'll mark 1 inch before the end just to note that part. That's where I'll stop stitching when I head over to the sewing machine. You'll find out why as we move along, okay? I'll go ahead to repeat the same steps for the front pattern. I'll place it right sides facing each other, then mark out the half-inch allowance as well. After marking the half an inch allowance, I would also note 1 inch before the end, just like I did for the back pattern. That is where I'm going to stop stitching, or that's where I'll start stitching from, okay? So here's what I have when I was done stitching. And like I said, I stopped 1 inch before the end of the crotch for both the back and the front pattern, okay? Now I'll just go in with my iron to open the seams and press, okay? Do the same thing for the front pattern and the back pattern as well. Then let's proceed to attach the pocket. In order to attach the pocket, you will need to cut out 2 pieces of fabric on fold that measure 7 inches on fold and 11 inches long. The second one is also 7 inches wide and 11 inches long. And once I place it open, it's going to be 14 inches wide and 11 inches long, okay? So that's just it. The next step is to go in with your chalk to note the wrong side of your pocket, especially if it is hard to tell the wrong side from the right side. The fabric I'm working with is just very hard to tell the wrong side from the right side. That's why I just like to mark it out, okay? The next step is to place your front pattern on the table, right sides facing each other, so that we can determine how long and how wide we want our pockets to be. For me, I want my pocket to be 7 inches long, which I marked. Then I want the pocket to be 2.5 inches wide. You could do 3, okay? It's not a must that you do exactly what I'm doing. You could do 8, okay? Then I'll go in with my ruler and connect both points together. Note, you could use your curve to connect both points together depending on the shape you want your pocket to have. Just use your discretion and do whatever you want. Next, I'll go in with my scissors to trim it out. After trimming out the shape of the pocket that I want, I would bring in the pocket and place them right sides facing each other. Alright, the next step is easy. Just place your front pattern over the pocket and trim off the same pocket shape we already cut out earlier. That's just it, okay? The next step is to pick up the first pocket piece and fold it wrong sides facing each other. Do the same for the second pocket piece. Fold it wrong sides facing each other, just as shown. Now, go ahead to mark your half an inch stitching allowance along the edge. Once you're done marking the half-inch allowance, the next step is to head over to the sewing machine and stitch it down. After stitching, the next step is to trim off the excess allowance just as shown. After which, you're going to flip the pocket back to the wrong side, okay? Carry out the same steps for the second pocket. Trim off the excess seam allowance and flip it back to the wrong side as well. Once you've flipped the pocket, take them to your ironing table and give them a good press. After pressing, go back to your sewing machine and top stitch using 0.25 inch, that is a quarter of an inch allowance. Here's what mine looks like after top stitching. Now we can move on to fixing the pocket properly. Remember, the pocket is still turned to the wrong side. Do not flip it to the right side, okay? Now, Keep one of the pockets for one side of the shot and keep the second pocket for the second side of the shot. Now, you're going to pick the first pocket and place it right sides facing each other with the shot. As in, the right side of the pocket should face the right side of the shot and you pin it down, okay? Ensure that the second side of the pocket is not in the way. Now, carry out the same steps for the second pocket. Place them right sides facing each other whilst ensuring the other side of the pocket is not in the way. Then go ahead to also pin it down. The next step is to stitch the shorts to the pocket. Go ahead and stitch along the pinned area using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, that's 0.25 inch, right from the beginning to the end, just as shown. Once that's done, the next step is to top stitch. In order to top stitch, flip your pocket towards the other side just as shown, whilst ensuring that your allowance is towards the pocket side. It is important that your allowance is towards the pocket side for your top stitch to lay nicely, okay? So whilst ensuring that the allowance is towards the pocket side, place it on your sewing machine and top stitch. So I am just going to top stitch from beginning to the end, just as shown, whilst ensuring that my allowance is towards the pocket, okay? After top stitching, we have one more top stitch to do. Just fold in your pocket just as shown and place it on the sewing machine and top stitch using about 0.25 inch, that's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This will ensure that your pocket comes out neat and it lays really nicely, okay? After top stitching, here is what the top stitch looks like. Now go ahead to flip your pocket to the back just as shown, okay? And there you have it, your pocket is ready. We just need to stitch the pocket in place at the side and at the top. To prevent your pocket from gaping after stitching, ensure your pocket lays nicely, okay? If possible, iron it, okay? The next step is to go ahead to hold the pocket down. So I'm going to stitch it from beginning to the end at the side, then move over to the top and also stitch it down. And there you have it, our pocket is ready. Go ahead to carry out the same steps for the other side, for the second pocket I mean, okay? At this point, I'm done attaching the second pocket and here is what we have, okay? The next step is to shape the waistline. Remember, when we drafted the shot, we took in 1/2 inch at the waistline to help shape the waistline. We will repeat the same thing here. Fold the shot into two just like I've done. Then go in on the waistline by 1/2 inch and mark. Then also note your hip line. Use your curve to connect from the waistline to the hip line just as shown and then proceed to trim it out using your scissors. The next step is to join the front part of the shot to the back part of the shot. So I'm going to place the both of them right sides facing each other and I'm going to pin. I like to pin to ensure that everything aligns perfectly. After pinning, I'm going to head over to my sewing machine to stitch the sides using 1/2 inch seam allowance from beginning to the end for both the left part of the shot and the right part of the shot. Now it is time to close the crotch area. I'll pick the left side of the crotch and pin it down. The shape might be looking funny, but it's going to align perfectly. I'll pin the left side of the crotch and I would also go ahead to pin the right side of the crotch. Then I'll proceed to stitch the crotch using 1/2 inch seam allowance. I would stitch the right part of the crotch and the left side of the crotch just as shown. After stitching the crotch, the next step is to trim off any part of the crotch that is shooting out unnecessarily. Okay, you can leave it, but I'll just trim that out. Okay, the next step is to go ahead to close the crotch properly. I'll just open up my seam allowance this way, both at the front and behind. Then I'll head over to my sewing machine to stitch along the crotch area to close it just as shown. It ensures that your crotch comes out neat and properly aligned. So I'll just go ahead to close the crotch just like I've explained, and here is what the crotch area looks like from the front and here is what the crotch looks like from behind. Okay, the next step is to attach our waistband. In order to cut out the waistband, I'm going to go ahead to measure around the waist to get the exact waist measurement. Carefully do this. If possible, do this more than once to be sure. You don't want to cut out your waistband and whilst attaching it, you realize that
it's not enough or it doesn't go around, okay? Or it's not going around. So after measuring mine, what I got is 44.5 inches. So I'm going to write that down. So the round waist is 44.5 inches. I'm going to add 1 inch joining allowance to that. So 44.5 plus 1 inch, that is 45.5 inches. That is the length of the waistband I am going to cut out. Remember, the width of my waistband is 1.5 inches. I'm going to add 0.5 inch allowance for joining the waistband to the short. So what I'm going to cut out, what I'm going to fold is 2 inches, which you see me measuring, okay? I'm just going to go in with my iron to press out that 2 inches so that I can get a long, strip of fabric. Okay, so I'm just going to iron that out and cut it out with my scissors. After cutting it out, I'm going to measure out exactly what I need. Remember, I need 45.5 inches. So I would measure 45.5 inches and I would cut it out. The next step is to cut out the length of elastic you would need for the waistband. First, note your waist circumference. My waist circumference is 30 inches. From that number, you subtract about 3 to 5 inches. That means I could either use 25 inches, 26 or 27 inches of elastic. For mine, I'm going with 27 inches. So that's 30 inches minus 3, okay? That's why I decided to use 27 inches. The next step is to notch the midpoint of our waistband so that we can fix in our eyelet. So just notch the midpoint of your waistband and place it like so. Next, I am going to use my ruler and my chalk to mark the midpoint of the waistband. After that, I'll take my tape rule and measure down from the top of the waistband by 3/4 of an inch. That's 0.75 inches, and I would mark it. From that point, I will go out by 1 inch on one side and 1 inch on the other side. That is where the eyelet will be fixed. In order to fix in the eyelet, the first thing I'll do is to open up the waistband and then use my soldering iron to create the hole. Next, I'll take the eyelet, that's the main piece with the barrel, and push it through the hole from the front. Then I'll place the washer, which is the flat ring, over the back of the eyelet. After that, I'll place both pieces into my eyelet press machine and press it down firmly so it locks into place. Carry out the same steps for the second hole. Actually, you don't even need to use an eyelet. You could just create a hole and pass your drawstring or your rope through it, okay? You could just use a scissors to, cut out a bit of hole and pass your drawstring. That's just it, okay? Once the eyelet is fixed in place, here is what it looks like. Now let's head over to our sewing machine to fix our waistband properly. The first thing I would do is to place the elastic on top of each other using 1/2 inch allowance, and I would stitch, okay? I'll stitch multiple times. Actually, using a zigzag stitch is preferred at this point. So if you have a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, go ahead to use it. The next step is to also close the sides of my waistband. I'll place the waistband right sides facing each other, and I'll go to the sewing machine to stitch using 1/2 inch allowance from beginning to the end. After stitching, here is what I have. I'll just trim off the excess allowance just as shown. The next step is to fold your waistband properly and pass in the elastic. Now, let's close it off the easy way. Place it on your sewing machine and stitch along the allowance you added. Make sure you are stitching very close to the elastic but not on the elastic itself. The elastic should stay free inside the waistband. Here's a simple trick I use to make this easier for beginners. Once I stitch the waistband to a point, I stop and I backstitch. Then I bring out the waistband and gently pull out the elastic, okay? After pulling out the elastic, I would put it back and continue stitching again. With this step, you are sure that your elastic must go around, because one of the problems beginners face is that they will say my elastic did not go around. No, once you stitch a bit, you backstitch, you stop, and you pull out the elastic. Repeat the step until you are done, and your elastic must go around, and your elastic will also lay flat, okay? After stitching, I'll go ahead to properly spread the waistband round the elastic. Next, we are going to stitch a second line around the waistband about 1/2 inch below the top edge. As you sew, make sure to stretch the waistband a little so it stays flat and doesn't fold or wrinkle. This line will be for the casing of your drawstring. The next step is to go ahead to loosen the drawstring and use my safety pin to pass in the drawstring into the channel. So I'll just take my time to carefully pass in the drawstring through the channel. This might take a while, so just take your time and get it done. And once it comes out, I'll try my best to pass it back into the metal and tie back the drawstring as I met it in the first place. Once I'm done doing that, the next step is to attach the waistband to the short. To do that, I have to locate the midpoint on the waistband that we notched earlier. Just look for that midpoint that we notched and match it to the midpoint of the short. Okay, match both of them and head over to your sewing machine to stitch it round. Now, as you're attaching the waistband to the shirt, do not forget stretch while you sew. Just keep going, stretch, and sew all the way through. If you don't, you might end up with little folds, and we don't want that. So just take your time and do it slowly. So here's what I have when I was done stitching the waistband to the shirt. Okay, everything looks good and on point. The next thing I want to do is to hem the base of the shirt. In order to hem, just fold in a little allowance, then fold it again and stitch all around on your sewing machine. Take your time so it comes out neat. Then do the same thing for the other leg of the shirt. Okay, and that's it. Our shirt is ready and it looks really, really neat. Okay, I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye.